Hello there, Schizophreniforms, aka David Bradley, aka Dr. B here. Nice to see ya. So I've been awake all night because I'm thinking about lots of things that I would want to know, and I'm feeling quite progressive. So one of the things that has occurred to me, as you may see from the title of the video, is that I talk a lot about my own experiences and things like that, but I haven't actually offered any practical examples of ways that, like, in daily life you might overcome some of these issues. So it's not just overcoming the actual mental health issue itself, but there's a lot of stigma attached to, like, something like, for example, claiming benefits or not being able to sustain full-time employment because of your mental health issues. So like I said, I often talk about a lot of spiritual sides and positives and the recovery and the less unpleasant or experience-based issues surrounding mental health issues, but I thought for this video I'd offer some more practical, down to earth and day-to-day examples of, or my own personal experience that might elucidate an example of how to deal with these things. And the two main points of it are basically this: money and sustaining your financial life, and then in relation to money, emotions and sustaining healthy perspectives so as to overcome stigma by leading as an example. I'll just launch into it. So we all need money to survive in the modern world, and too often there is a feeling of shame and stigma when it comes to either having trouble finding or sustaining employment, or the idea that, especially very common in England, is like this idea of a scrounger, a benefit scrounger, as though if someone can't sustain their own finances and have a mental health issue, they're in some way bleeding the system. Like, that's what the system is there for. Like, that's why we have the welfare state. Is if you are unable to cope, if you have these issues, there is no shame in asking for help. And that will become more apparent in my own little story as to why I believe that and, like, the importance of it. So there's other problems associated with managing finances in both employment and, if you're unable to work, managing the process of applying and maintaining a benefit claim. So in my own experience, like, I genuinely feel that, like, even accepting that I can't work feels like a shameful thing, like an embarrassing thing, and there is a social stigma attached to claiming benefits, and that's not just externally, that's not just other people and the way they look at you, it's in your mind as well. It's your perception of, like, yourself, because you're not able to sustain your own existence financially perhaps, and then the way you think other people look at you because of that. And there is things like I struggle to find a house because I'm living on disability benefits, and the landlords themselves aren't allowed to accept disability benefits, and apparently it's to do with their mortgages. It's the mortgage companies that don't allow DSS. You might see it in the windows of the shop, the estate agents and things like that. No DSS, or in the claims, and it's actually to do with the mortgage providers, because even though people on long-term disabilities, for example, basically have a more sustainable and regular, consistent income of someone who might lose their job or have holiday, or to potentially they could have a more sustainable income if they're on permanent disability benefits, because that money is guaranteed to a certain extent by the government that provides it. And, like, for all that we might complain about the government, at least they provide it for some people. I'm not going to go into my own opinions about, like, stigmatization and ignorance and neglect in that, because there's a lot of stuff in the news which I have seen and am horrified by. Like, I'm very lucky because of the extreme nature of my diagnosis, because, like, while I appear rational to you, that's because I'm on my own or with my best friends talking. Like, I'm not like this normally. I'm not like this out and about, and that's a big part of my condition. And, like, I'm not able to work. Like, it's a legitimate thing. Like, I have worked in the past before becoming ill. Even when ill, I worked quite a lot doing functions work and making music, but it wasn't sustainable because I couldn't manage my own psyche whilst practicing those, because I'm a musician. I couldn't manage my own experiences, and it made the business unsustainable, and then that inevitably failed. So there's a potential there. But in general, it's also a self-perception thing. So I'll continue reading anyway. For me, before the extent of my disability became apparent, which is schizophrenia, and I was literally unable to sustain even social interaction regularly and healthily, let alone able to work. I did work in customer service and in a variety of bars and bowling alley, and as I just mentioned, doing functions work even when I was unwell, which I was good at, the music side of things, but the managing it and the even turning up on time or looking good or presenting a marketable package there was incredibly difficult for me because of the nature of my illness. So even in all these jobs, I had varying degrees of success. I worked hard as my depression, which I was already suffering before I developed, well, I got my diagnosis of schizophrenia. I've always had elements of schizophrenia, but it was exacerbated at a certain point in my life, which is perfectly timed. If you want to know any more of my history, you can ask me. But it was about 1920, which is usually the beginning point of when these things manifest, regardless of drug use or suicide attempts like it was in my case that aggravated it. That's when those things manifest, is between roughly 19 and 25 or 30, something like that. But prior to that, I was already suffering from quite severe depression, which I was managing with antidepressants and little bits of therapy, but I didn't really have much therapy. But anyway, the point being that I did as much as I could despite that condition, and then I did a diploma in music. I got my grade 8 rock school bass exam, got a merit. It was 6% off a distinction, which genuinely still haunts me to this day, because if I just worked that, just even concentrated a little bit more on the day, because I wasn't so self-absorbed in my depressive nature, probably could have made that merit, that distinction. But oh well, it's just one of those things. I accept it anyway. And I still got into a university degree on the basis of that diploma and the grade 8 rock school, and did the first year of a foundation degree. And I faced challenges, but I was still vaguely able to sustain my work and education. But then when my initial 2 back-to-back over the course of 2 years psychosis took hold, I lost everything, basically. I lost my flat, my friends, my relationship with the woman I was with at the time, and fundamental to all of this, with the exception of perhaps my relationship and friends, but it exacerbated it massively, was because I claimed sick pay from the job centre rather than through the company I worked for, not realising that that wasn't the way I was supposed to do it. I also lost my job and wasn't allowed to return after I felt I'd recovered from the reason I stopped working there, which was the initial psychosis and depression. Because I didn't actually get diagnosed until my second concurrent episode of psychosis, so it was a rock bottom point for me. But paradoxically, so I missed a section out, sorry. And then after that I slept on sofas, and what I basically did was rely on student loans for a course that it was basically impossible for me to complete, and I did fail because of my mental health issues and the burgeoning psychosis and the growing effects of my schizophrenia. And eventually I basically sectioned myself out of fear that I'd lost my life, because in my psychosis I thought that I died, because I did a suicide attempt and then woke up with these odd perceptions of reality, voices, hallucinations, blah, 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 which was so much more prevalent than before I'd done that. I thought I was dead. But I had faith to a certain extent. Like, paradoxically, what I've put here is, paradoxically, in that single act of trust, the submission that I needed help, slowly my life finally, after, I mean, like, arguably, like, the first time I got any help with the actual schizophrenia, the actual psychotic hallucinations, the real, genuine treatment of my depression, things like that, that was the turning point, was just going, right, I've hit rock bottom, I've broken my brain, I might even be dead, I don't know what reality is, stuff like that, and I just accepting that, even no matter what my perception was, just accepting that I need help. That was the key. So in that act of acceptance that I was unwell, I soon after, within 3 months of like sleeping on sofas, and if Benjamin Joseph Hammond watches this, I lived in his kitchen, which I accidentally set on fire, meditating with a candle, and I had to pay him for the damage, but that's not the point. The point is being that without him, there were so many times in the early stage of my recovery, and the other people that lived in his house prior to that, but especially at that exact point, he let me live in his kitchen. And without the love of that one friend and the integration of that mental health support, uh, I could be homeless. I could be a vagrant. Or at least I would have had to move home up north to my family, which is 300 miles from everything I know, and I didn't even have the money to get there. But eventually, after those 3 months of him tolerating my bullshit and looking after me as best he could, like, I was housed in supported housing, and then that helped me get benefits and advice and emotional support, as well as managing my finances, and generally shown how to start rebuilding, given skills, or even having the work actively done for me of managing my finances or cleaning my house, for example. I never had anyone clean my house for me, but they instigated it, they promoted it, they encouraged me, they gave me affirmatory emotional reward for looking after myself, which made a big difference to my recovery. And hopefully you'll see the point of me saying this. Is somehow in the process of abandoning the thought that I could manage my own life and that I didn't need help, and not feeling that shame and embarrassment, I finally started the long, arduous process of rebuilding, and now with a full network of support and recovery that has equipped me to a great extent with the few self-management skills I now have. I still rely heavily on the support of my partner and financial support from the government, but I'm not homeless. I eat well, I care for myself as best I'm capable of, and I wouldn't have done South Down Housing. They were the people that I got put with, and they were saints. They tolerated so much nonsense from me, and the other people that lived in the block, I won't tell you where I lived, but the people that lived in it put up with my bullshit, I put up with their bullshit. It was interesting, and without that, I don't know where I would be now. I honestly don't. And the point being to this anyway is that there is no shame in asking for help and admitting that you're not able to manage these things yourself, because, well, whether that be finding employment that allows for disabled workers to express their needs and still be useful. So, for example, if you have got the relevant qualifications for a job, there's something called the Guaranteed Interview Scheme. I think that operates in most of England, if not all of England, and possibly even all of the UK as well, that entitles you to a guaranteed interview if you're qualified for the job on the basis of your disability, so as to avoid discrimination against people with disabilities. I've still never been able to find any real formal employment for any long-term things on the basis of my diagnosis, but my diagnosis is quite severe, so I understand that. There's a difference between a disability and perhaps the stigma associated with the people that could be dangerous, or the people that aren't as lucid as I am, or aren't as well supported as I am. I can see why that would be unappealing to an employer, although I have been refused an interview despite being qualified, so don't rely on that. But it's just, there's possibilities of that there are employment places, there are workplaces that will compensate for the difficulties you have and still employ you out of this Anti-Discrimination Act. So that's an interesting thing to think about. And then, like for example, in my case, simply not being ashamed to admit that you can't cope alone, either way, the acceptance itself and acknowledging that, in fact, it's actually quite a courageous thing to accept you aren't perfect and that you're not like everyone else. Like, further to that as well, it's like when you do admit there's a problem, and accepting that, like, you're not capable of doing that at the moment, at least. There's people out there that, if you admit you've got a problem, if you seek help and you don't hide your issues and you're honest with them, like doctors and mental health professionals, things like that, there are people that will go out of their way. They'll go out of the way to support you and help you learn and rebuild your life and give you skills that you never had before, even before you were unwell. If it's not a permanent or long-term illness, it's something that's come recently. They'll help equip people. Want to do this. Like, there's people that it's their vocation. There are a lot of people out there. There is a lot of hope, and like what I'm getting at is just don't be ashamed and of not knowing what to do, and just ask people that you trust. Look for advice. Submit that there's a problem, and people will lift you up on their shoulders until you've got the strength to do it. It doesn't seem like that sometimes, but there's no shame in it. That's the point. There's no shame. And to lead by example as well, that was the second part of this. It's like, there's no reason in my mind, or in the mind of most people that actually know people with mental health issues, and and even in some more open-minded people that have never experienced anyone with mental health issues, they understand that being mentally ill doesn't mean there's something morally wrong with you. You shouldn't be ashamed and feel humiliated by others or yourself on the basis of being ill. It's an illness. There's a psychological issue, and regardless of whether it's physical or psychological, it's still an illness that needs to be treated and managed, and that it may be permanent, it may be transient, but it's an illness, and there's nothing to be ashamed about that. And the more you're honest about it, the more you talk about it and express this, the more, and take that courage and accept that there's nothing to be ashamed of, and just talk about it in plain terms, Just be honest as much as you can, and as much as is healthy, with the people that you have a mental health issue, this is how you deal with it, and blah, 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 and they'll help you. And the more you do that, the more you inspire other people to feel like they don't need to feel ashamed either. It gradually changes the image, because all it takes is one person seeing, I don't know. That's why I make these videos. Like, I've written it here. It's not just a dialogue. I literally want to be an example and inspiration to the people in society that sometimes are the most vulnerable, that you may not be perfect, you may never be like everyone else, but that you don't have to live in shame or fear or embarrassment or feel humiliated, or that just because you need help and advice and have a different mind or indeed body, if it's a physical disability or a neurological disorder, that it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you morally. There's nothing. You're not a bad person. You just have an illness. And some people don't hear that very often, and that's why I wanted to make this video, because it's taken me years to reconcile the idea that while the manifestations of my illness can be bad or negative and have negative social consequences, it's not because I'm a bad person, it's because I have an illness. And the sooner I ask and admit that I'm struggling with it, the sooner I ask for help, people rush in. People want to fix that. People want to help you. There's huge numbers of institutions, and they're not just incarceration institutions. There's hospitals, there's treatment, there's all that stuff available, and all you really have to do is just accept that you need that help and reach out for it and be honest as best you can. And people will do it. They'll do it for free. You may never have to work again on if you're not capable of it. And think, if you're struggling in a job now and you're suffering from severe depression, and like with depression, for example, it may be a transient state. It may be something you go into and then out of. It may be something you can be permanently cured of, perhaps. But in that time when you need it, like, think of the difference between struggling through a job that is making you fucking even more miserable when you're ill, you're ill, and just how much of a relief it would be if you got that support of having some minor, even if it's only mild financial backing. Like, it can make a difference to your recovery. And being honest with people, like saying that, like, I feel there's something wrong, I need help with this, going to doctors and being as transparent as you feel comfortable, because that's what I did. Like, and I'm able to be this lucid now, despite having arguably one of the more severe mental health issues that it's possible to have manifested. And it's because I was lucky, I guess, that I had felt this courage and this determination that something was wrong. And I hope that's inspiring. Like, that's why I wanted to talk about it. So yeah, there's a bit of a different thing from what I normally talk about, but I thought it might be interesting. So that's the end of the video, and be the change you want to see in the world. Peace.